When people ask what caused an incident, they often want a single neat answer, like a broken patch or a careless click, because neat answers feel satisfying and final. The problem is that neat answers are often wrong, especially early, and wrong answers can push a team to fix the wrong thing while the real weakness remains. For brand new learners, the most important mindset shift is that root cause is not a vibe or a story. It is a conclusion you earn by following evidence. Evidence-driven root cause work protects you from pressure because incidents create a strong social force to explain quickly, and leaders may push for certainty when you only have partial facts. Identifying root cause without guessing means you keep two tracks in your head at once: the track of what you currently know and the track of what you still need to prove. That is not indecision. It is discipline, and discipline is what keeps remediation from becoming random. When remediation is evidence-driven, it closes the real door the incident used, rather than painting over a symptom. A helpful place to start is by separating the terms cause, root cause, and contributing factors, because beginners often use them interchangeably. A cause can be the immediate mechanism that allowed harm, such as a stolen credential being used to log in. A root cause is deeper. It answers why that mechanism was possible and why it was not prevented or detected earlier, such as weak authentication controls, overly broad access, or lack of monitoring in a key area. Contributing factors are conditions that made the incident worse or made response harder, like unclear ownership, delayed patching, incomplete logs, or confusing communication. If you treat the immediate cause as the root cause, you might only reset passwords and move on, leaving the conditions that made password theft easy. If you treat contributing factors as the root cause, you might write a report about process improvement while ignoring the technical gap that enabled access. Evidence-driven work keeps these layers distinct so the organization can make changes at the right depth. Root cause is about prevention power, not about storytelling. Evidence itself needs a clear meaning, because people sometimes call assumptions evidence without realizing they are doing it. Evidence is information you can point to and explain, like logs that show a login from an unusual location, system records that show a configuration change, or validated reports from users about what they observed. Evidence has sources, timestamps, and context, and it can be cross-checked. Assumptions are ideas that seem likely, like thinking an attacker used phishing because an employee reported a suspicious email, but without evidence that links that email to the actual compromise. Hypotheses are structured assumptions that you plan to test, like proposing that a credential was stolen through a specific method and then listing what you would expect to find if that were true. Evidence-driven root cause means you actively convert assumptions into hypotheses and then into either supported conclusions or rejected possibilities. It also means you are willing to say that something is unknown when it truly is unknown. That honesty is not weakness. It is what keeps remediation aligned with reality. A practical way to avoid guessing is to build a timeline anchored on evidence, because time is often the thread that connects separate clues into one coherent picture. Start with the first confirmed signal and work backward and forward, adding only what you can support. When you discover a new clue, you place it in time and see how it fits the story. If the timeline has gaps, you label them as gaps instead of filling them with speculation. This approach helps you answer important questions like when access first occurred, how long the attacker had time to act, and which actions happened before others. It also helps you avoid the trap of choosing the first plausible explanation, because plausible explanations often collapse when you test them against the timeline. A careful timeline becomes a map of certainty and uncertainty, and that map guides what evidence you need next. In other words, the timeline is not just a report artifact, it is an investigation tool. Another key technique is to separate symptoms from causes, because incidents often present as symptoms that can have multiple origins. A service outage might be caused by an attacker, a configuration mistake, or a hardware problem, and it can even be caused by your own containment actions. Unusual network traffic might be data exfiltration, but it might also be a backup job or a system update behaving oddly. A flood of authentication failures might be brute force, but it might also be a misconfigured application. Evidence-driven root cause work treats symptoms as starting points, not as conclusions. You list plausible causes, then you look for discriminating evidence, meaning evidence that would be present for one cause and not for another. This is how you reduce the risk of confirmation bias, where you see what you expect to see. The goal is not to chase every theory forever. It is to narrow the field using evidence that actually differentiates possibilities. When you think about remediation, it helps to recognize that remediation decisions often happen before root cause is fully proven, and that is okay if you handle it carefully. Early remediation actions should focus on stopping harm and stabilizing systems, which may include isolating systems, resetting access, or increasing monitoring. These are protective actions that reduce immediate risk even if the root cause is still unknown. The danger is when teams confuse early protective actions with final remediation, meaning they assume the incident is solved because the immediate fire is out. Evidence-driven remediation has phases, where the early phase reduces harm and the later phase addresses the deeper conditions that allowed the incident. The later phase requires root cause clarity, because that is when you make changes that cost time, money, and operational disruption. A beginner should learn to communicate these phases clearly so that leaders understand why additional work is necessary even after services appear normal. A common beginner mistake is to look for a single root cause when the reality is often a chain of causes where multiple failures aligned. For example, an attacker might exploit a weak password, but weak password policies might exist because of user friction concerns, and monitoring might fail because logs were not centralized, and the attacker might move laterally because access permissions were too broad. Which of those is the root cause depends on what you mean by root, but evidence-driven thinking helps you identify the highest leverage changes, the ones that would have prevented the incident or reduced its impact significantly. Sometimes you will find a primary entry point cause and a separate amplification cause, which is what allowed the incident to grow. Evidence-driven remediation should address both, because fixing only the entry point may still leave the environment vulnerable to a different entry point. The report should reflect this reality by describing a causal chain rather than forcing a single simplistic answer. Leaders can handle complexity when it is presented clearly and tied to evidence. Another part of identifying root cause without guessing is acknowledging the limits of visibility, because missing evidence is itself an important finding. If key logs were absent, if endpoint telemetry was incomplete, or if time synchronization was inconsistent, you may not be able to prove certain details. In that case, the evidence-driven approach is to clearly state what cannot be confirmed and why, and then to treat the lack of visibility as a remediation target. Many incidents repeat not because attackers are brilliant, but because organizations cannot see what is happening well enough to learn. Improving logging, monitoring coverage, and retention can be one of the most important remediation outcomes, because it increases your ability to identify root cause next time. This also protects you from guessing because better visibility reduces uncertainty. For beginners, it is important to understand that evidence-driven work sometimes ends with uncertainty, and the correct response to uncertainty is to improve evidence sources, not to invent certainty. It is also essential to distinguish between the attacker's method and the organization's weakness, because people sometimes focus too much on the attacker and not enough on the environment. The attacker's method might be phishing, credential stuffing, or exploitation, but the environment's weakness might be that authentication controls were insufficient, that patch management was behind, or that segmentation was weak. Focusing on method alone can lead to narrow fixes, like training against phishing, while ignoring structural controls like stronger authentication and better detection. Evidence-driven remediation asks what control failed, what control was missing, and what control could have reduced impact even if the attacker found a way in. This control-oriented framing helps you avoid guessing because it grounds your conclusions in observable control behavior and evidence of gaps. It also helps you prioritize, because controls that reduce multiple types of risk are often more valuable than fixes that only address one scenario. This is how you turn an incident into meaningful risk reduction rather than a patchwork of reactions. Pressure is one of the hardest parts of root cause work, because stakeholders may demand a quick answer for reasons that feel legitimate. Leaders may need to brief boards, customer-facing teams may need talking points, and technical teams may need to know what to fix. The evidence-driven response is not to refuse to answer, but to answer with confidence about what is confirmed and humility about what is still under investigation. You can share provisional hypotheses clearly labeled as such, along with the plan to validate them. You can also share immediate remediation steps that reduce risk regardless of root cause, like tightening access controls or increasing monitoring. What you avoid is presenting a hypothesis as a conclusion to satisfy the need for closure. That habit can lock the organization into the wrong narrative and the wrong remediation plan. Under stress, controlling the message includes controlling the urge to guess. To make remediation evidence-driven, you also need to tie each proposed fix to the specific evidence that justifies it and to the outcome it is meant to prevent. If you propose a change but cannot explain what evidence supports the need for that change, you may be reacting emotionally rather than responding rationally. Similarly, if you propose a fix but cannot describe how it reduces risk, it might be a cosmetic change. Evidence-driven remediation is measurable in principle, even if you do not provide numeric measurements. For example, if the evidence suggests unauthorized access through weak authentication, then a remediation outcome might be that unauthorized access becomes significantly harder and easier to detect. If the evidence suggests delayed detection due to missing logs, then an outcome might be improved logging coverage and alerting for similar patterns. Linking fixes to evidence and outcomes also makes it easier to prioritize, because you can focus on changes that address the highest leverage weaknesses first. This is especially important in environments with limited resources. Another misconception to correct is that root cause analysis is only about finding the original entry point. Entry point matters, but root cause remediation often includes addressing lateral movement opportunities, privilege escalation paths, and weak recovery validation. Sometimes the initial entry point is unknown or unprovable, but you can still identify how the attacker moved, what permissions they used, and what data or systems they touched. Those findings can drive remediation that reduces risk even without a confirmed initial exploit. Evidence-driven thinking allows you to say that the initial access vector is unconfirmed while still providing solid conclusions about the confirmed activity and confirmed gaps. This is a mature posture because it avoids false certainty while still delivering real value. For beginners, it helps to remember that the purpose of root cause work is not to win a trivia contest about how the attacker got in. The purpose is to reduce the chance and impact of future incidents through grounded changes. As you bring all of this together, the phrase "without guessing" becomes a promise to yourself and to stakeholders that you will not trade accuracy for comfort. Root cause is an evidence-backed conclusion about why an incident was possible and why it was not prevented or detected sooner, and it often involves a chain of causes rather than a single point. Evidence-driven work uses timelines, distinguishes symptoms from causes, tests hypotheses against discriminating evidence, and openly acknowledges visibility limits. Remediation starts with protective actions that reduce immediate harm and then moves toward deeper control improvements that address the real weaknesses revealed by evidence. When you practice this discipline, you produce reports that hold up over time and remediation plans that actually prevent recurrence instead of just restoring normal operations temporarily. The incident may have forced you into a stressful moment, but evidence-driven root cause work turns that moment into a structured learning opportunity. If you can hold the line against guessing, you protect the organization from repeating the same incident under a different name, and you become the kind of responder who makes systems measurably stronger rather than simply quieter.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.